It was a while ago that we made the video on the Dutch first tier stadiums, but finally it's time for the second tier, known as the Eerste Divisie. Here they are. We start off in The Hague at Bingo Stadium, a stadium with a very shiny aluminium clad exterior, and yes, I did look it up. The Dutch do spell aluminium with 2 I's. So you're on your own, Americans and Canadians. Inside it's a fairly conventional continuous single tier of seating, although I do quite like it when clubs have their crest depicted on the seating. That bird there is a white heron, in case anybody was wondering. Nobody cares. Cambuur Stadium. This is a more conventional ground with a small stand on each side made up of mostly covered seating. Not all of the roofs are cantilever, so there are some obstructed views throughout, but overall, it seems like a solid, no-frills stadium that gets the job done. A classic British football stadium of the Dutch variety. Stadion de Vliet. Well, this one is a little bit unusual. It was opened in 1951 but was mostly demolished and rebuilt in the mid-1990s, which was when it gained these unusual buildings protruding from each corner. They are mostly just used as offices. Actually, come to think of it, if it weren't for those buildings, it wouldn't be too dissimilar to the last one, as it's a fairly traditional layout within. Matchaholic Stadium. I assume a matchaholic is someone who is addicted to matcha. In which case, if it weren't for coffee, I probably would be a matchaholic. Dodged a bullet there. Matcha is a hell of a drug. Kyushu cocaine, they call it. Anyway, I'm rambling about green tea because this is a fairly basic stadium. Although I do appreciate the leafy surrounds, which make for a serene setting. Jan Lauwers Stadion. Not only is the capacity nearly identical, but the stadium as a whole is very similar to the last one we saw. However, unlike Matchaholic Stadium, all of the stands at this ground match each other and overall it just looks a bit more uniform. It is one of the oldest grounds in the league, having officially opened in 1948, although I believe the club have been playing on this site since the 30s. The Old Meerdijk. For the non-Dutch speakers out there, the old means the old, and Meerdijk means a meerkat, probably. Outside they've opted for the tried and tested red brick metallic cladding combination, which looks fine, I guess. Once more, it's a ground with a standalone stand on each side. There are some especially large gaps in the corners though. Stadion de Weverberg. This stadium is actually named after a hotel that used to sit on this site. I guess it was a famous one and not just the Dutch version of an Econolodge or something. It is quite a vibrant, colourful stadium. As you saw, the roof was in club colours. Also, in the midst of the pandemic, club supporters painted these murals of club legends throughout the stadium. A nice touch. And inside there is some more artwork in the form of the seats themselves. I love that. Euroborg. This might take the cake for the most distinctive stadium in the league. Firstly, it's built as part of a complex that includes shops, theatres, offices, apartment towers, a casino and a hotel. But the stadium itself has a very peculiar look to it. In particular, the concrete exterior dotted with these circular windows. Inside it's pretty standard by comparison, but it still looks great. And of course, being one of the newer and more expensive builds in the league, the amenities are second to none. GS Stahlwerken Stadion. It's named after a nearby steelworks, which is presumably the company that provided the steel for some of the more recent construction work at this ground. Remember kids, when you're purchasing steel beams for your stadium, always support local. I for one have never built a stadium using cheap imported materials. Inside we have a significantly raised stand on each side, giving every spectator a great view. Sportpark de Toekomst. Jong Ajax is one of the 4 youth teams of the first tier clubs that competes in the second division. I guess young means young. Who'd have thunk it? As far as secondary stadiums go though, this is one of the nicer ones. I'm liking the arching roof of the one and only stand, which is held up by means of cable erection. Alphas Trainings Complex. This is not all that different to the last one, although the one and only stand is a lot less impressive. But it's a training ground after all. It's in good condition. What more could you expect? Yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce the Dutch G sound, I'll just go with de Herdgang. And that's a good name for the ground because I could envision a herd of goats wandering around, grazing on the field. Although, as with many grounds in this league, the natural grass has been replaced with synthetic. And goats tend to prefer grass that isn't plastic. Sport Complex Zeldenbosch. This is the last of the training grounds, which is good because apart from Ajax's, they haven't been all that interesting. This is another one stand wonder, not much else to say. Back to the normals now. Stadion de Gusselt. Although it's not entirely normal, the stadium is wrapped in what they call Business Park Gusselt. It's just more offices, and a McDonaldson's. Those were built around the stadium in the early 2000s. I should mention that the ground is named after a nearby castle, which is, well, let's face it, it's just a big old house. But I suppose in the Netherlands you don't really need a big castle with tall turrets and towers. You can just see your enemy coming from miles away anyway. Ratverlegstadion. I was curious what the word rat means in Dutch. It means rat. It was just the nickname of Antoon Verleg, whom the stadium is named after, apparently because of his quick movement. There are a couple of features that set this place apart. Firstly, there's an extensive amount of brickwork throughout, including in the corners, which makes for a nice change from concrete. Secondly, there's a small section of terracing situated directly behind each goal. Parkstad Limburgstadion. This stadium is a little more interesting than it appears from the air, as is almost always the case. I particularly like this striking facade which emulates the striped shirt that the Roda players wear. All but one side of the stadium looks like that. This side has an attached hotel. Another quirky feature is the roof and how it comes to a point in the corners, almost like one of those Arabic tents. It's a pretty cool stadium all round. 7-Eleven Stadion. To be clear, that's not 7-Eleven Stadion, because they don't operate in the Netherlands as far as I'm aware. This 7-Eleven, or 711, is actually a betting company from the land of Belgium. This ground has an eclectic mix of different stands, some old, some new, and to the south, there is actually a newer stand situated right in front of a disused older stand. That is rather strange, but in a good way. Frans Heesen Stadion. Interestingly, the stadium's not named after a past player as you might expect, but the owner of a yacht manufacturer who happens to be a supporter of the club. And not just financially, but he's an actual supporter of the club. Other than that, there are a lot of stadiums that have just 3 stands instead of 4, but not many have a high school where the 4th stand would have been, as is the case here. That's somewhat reminiscent of some high school football stadiums in the US. Kovebo Stadion de Koel. De Koel means the cool in Dutch, which seems like an odd name for a stadium, but in the local dialect it means the pit. And when you consider the stadium's unusual topographical features, that makes sense. The field is sunken into a depression akin to a pit, so the main stand is built into the slope. There's even a small grass section between the top and bottom tiers, which is not something you see very often. Love this ground. Koning Willem II Stadion. I often forget that there are several countries other than the UK that still have a monarchy. The Netherlands is one of them. They've got Willem Alexander, Sweden has got a bloke called Carl, Denmark has a Sheila called Marge, and of course Australia has King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Praise be upon them. Anyway, this ground dates back to the 1920s, but this stadium was basically built from scratch in the mid-90s. It's a fairly distinctive design, I suppose. I like the wavy roof. So there you have it. As for my favourite, well, it was tough. There are so many to choose from. Euroborg, Parkstad Limburg, the Pits. Yeah, why not? Let's go with the Cool. It certainly doesn't have the best amenities, not by a long way. But there's just something cozy about it. I don't know. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching. Have a good one.